Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And there's been a lot of talk about what are the best classes for 10.2, but an equally important decision is what racial are you going to pair with that best class. So in today's video, I wanted to cover my thoughts on what the best racials are for PvP in patch 10.2, given that there has been quite a significant amount of changes to different roles, such as the minute-and-a-half cooldown medallion for escaping crowd control for healers. That's down from 2 minutes, and it's had some big ramifications in terms of which racials are weighing in better or worse now. So I wanted to update everybody on my thoughts with regards to this so that you can make the best decision for yourself. There are also some racials that are pretty sleeper and actually pretty strong, and you should definitely consider. So let's get started here. We've got the Blood Elf Demon Hunter. Now, this is pretty much the only person that is going to play this is if you're playing a Horde Demon Hunter for some reason. And I don't know why you would do that with cross-faction play when you can be Night Elf. Blood Elf is providing a melee ranged AoE purge, but there are far too many trash debuffs in the game to really see significant value here. It is only really good into Paladins who don't have many trash buffs, and Paladin, Holy is not doing very good right now. So in my mind, I think Blood Elf is going to definitely feel a lot weaker in 10.2, given the current meta being Resto Druid, balanced Druids. These classes have a lot of buffs coverage, and your one target purge basically a lot of times not going to do very much. There's not really a lot of reason to be Blood Elf. Dark Iron Dwarf, on the other hand, is very powerful and very potent. It's both defensively strong and offensively strong. Activating Fire Blood increases your main stat, which is really good right now with how high our stats have gone in general. It's going to be a nice burst cooldown, and you can also use it defensively to strip off debuffs from yourself. And given how many classes have powerful damage over time effects, you're almost always going to get value here. As a healer, you also get value, as the Dwarven racial is great for escaping silences, such as the Root Solar Beam of a balanced Druid. So overall, Dark Iron Dwarf is not a bad pick basically for any role in the game. It's definitely going to feel strong both offensively and defensively. It's very well rounded. Drakthir, we're not really going to rank this. If you're an evoker, you have to be a Drakthir. They do have powerful racial effects, knockbacks, and knockups to definitely consider and bake into your play for PvP, but you're not really competing with anything because you can only be an evoker Drakthir. Draenei. Now, Draenei can be decently good. It is nice as an extra healing effect, but it's not super strong. I'd say it's better than Blood Elf, but not by much. It's really just the Gift of the Naru benefit of getting an extra heal. You could play this as really any role if you wanted to, but I would not necessarily recommend it unless you just looking like a space goat. Yeah, I would not necessarily recommend it for anything in the game, but it's not terrible. Normal Dwarf, similar to Dark Iron Dwarf, but pretty much only defensive benefit. As you're not going to get a main stat increase when you're activating your racial. You're just going to get a little bit of extra armor. It's a little bit more durable and defensive, but I think it's a little bit weaker than Dark Iron. There's a reason why players aren't taking it over that. It's just you get offensive benefit for the same amount of defensive benefit, really. So Dwarf, unfortunately, is getting dwarfed by Dark Iron. Undead. Now, Undead is still really good, even with the lowered healing cooldown on the trinket for healers, being able to escape fear effects. Warlocks are really popular right now. Shadow Priest is feeling a little bit in the mid range in terms of power, but pretty much every spec of Warlock is getting really popular, so being Undead can be really nice for escaping from crowd control. Obviously, if you're something like a warrior or a class that can escape fears on their own, you do start hitting some diminishing return caps on selecting this race, so I would not pick it in those instances. But if you're a healer, I think that this can be a decent pickup. It's also got some nice throughput benefits through its proc, shadow, heal, and damage effect, so you get a little bit of offensive benefit as well as being able to escape crowd control and still be able to use your medallion. So a nice little powerful effect there. Given the current meta, I think that Undead is a decent selection. Gnome is always really good here with balanced druids being so prevalent, as any healer that can't escape them, baseline something like a Mistweaver Monk or a Priest, it's going to feel really strong. For melee DPS as well, it can be great for being able to escape out of an extra root mechanic if you're going to get stuck. Where you start seeing a little bit of problems here is with range DPS. It's a bit overkill. You do get some, little stat increase for offensive benefit, but for casters, I would not necessarily recommend it. But healers that are, not able to escape Root Solar Beams or melee DPS, Gnome can be a decent pickup. It's going up into the A tier. Goblin, this is a really cheeky pick. It's a little bit of extra mobility with the little rocket jump that you get, a nice little stat benefit with the haste buff that it gets as well. It's decent both offensively and defensively in that regard, but I think it's missing a little bit. It's probably the best of the B tier. I think mobility ends up being a little bit stronger, or maybe just about equal to Gift of the Naru from the Draenei in the current meta. Generally, you're not really able to kite in a lot of cases where you could use the Goblin racial. I'm thinking something like a caster. Melee DPS, you're probably never going to want to select this. You've already got enough mobility as it is for most melee, at least out of the races that can select it, unless you really want to get cheeky with a shaman goblin. But even then, I think there's going to be better racial offers. It's just a little cheeky. You can be a little bit stylish with it, make a little kind of cheeky flex with it, but its overall throughput is definitely going to be noticeably lower than other races. High Mountain Tauren, now you get great versatility increases from High Mountain Tauren, and the mobility that you get also stuns the target, so you can use it as a pseudo interrupt, unlike the Goblin racial, which is nice. Its defensive bonuses plus that make it a really good pickup if you're interested in just getting another pseudo kick or another charge effect. I think it is slightly better. Do I really want to put it on A tier? Because really we're thinking Druid here with this one, and you're competing with Night Elf, but I think we can all guess where Night Elf's going to be going on this tier list. High Mountain is like a low A, I think. Low A, high B. Maybe I should have put like a B plus tier or something on this. It's pretty close in between. I think you do get more value. The versatility increasing effects of it are definitely going to be more beneficial than the Goblin for those, but it's pretty much only Druid that I really ever see even wanting to go for this if you're going to play Horde. But again, with cross-faction play, it's probably fallen off. So maybe like a high B, moving up into a low A. Human racial for healers has lost value because now basically your racial is going to share cooldown with your medallion with the lowered cooldown effect. So human is not really the best pick anymore for healers if you don't have to be it. I wouldn't recommend it, at least. Now, if you're DPS, it can be great. You can get away with playing adaptation on a lot of classes like hunters or death knights or something like this, and just get out of a lot of extra crowd control and still have that oh no button with your will to survive as a human racial to escape from stuns. So it's definitely still really strong, but for healers, I would not recommend it. I'm throwing it up into the S tier for now because it does get you a lot of throughput value as DPS, but as a healer, I would say that you should be probably switching from Paladin. The value from it has pretty much been lost. You would be much better off being Dark Iron to escape solar beams, or Gnome to Paladin for Dark Iron, and Gnome for every other healer in this regard. But for DPS, it's definitely still a really strong pickup. Cultiran, this is a super sleeper one. I've been having a lot of fun with it. I just uploaded a Warlock clip. If you're a caster that can stun somebody into a casted big damage spell, you get a huge value. You're getting huge value from this. It's super sleeper. You're also a little bit more durable than a lot of the other racial selection. For me, I'm throwing it up actually into a low A for 10.2. I think with casters like Destro and even Balanced Druid and even Mage specs, having an extra stun on your own that can knock an enemy away and give you a little bit of a gap closer and get to a safe distance is super clutch. The fact that it stuns for such a long duration on top of the mobility that you get from knocking someone away, I think outvalues what High Mountain or Goblin is going to provide to you in that regard, and it's just super fun. Lightforged Draenei, I see this one popping up every once in a while, but its damage output is still a little bit lackluster. I don't know if it's just not scaling properly, given how high item level is going up, but I really don't see it that much. It's usually pretty cheesy. I'm putting it down as the lowest at the moment. I don't see it really working out too well. It can be maybe cheesy for a Ret Paladin one shot or something like that, but you still probably get more value being human and escaping crowd control more often than you would from Lightforged Draenei. I just don't see it for them. Mag'har Orc is just really not good in PvP. It's just not. There's no real significant benefit of being Mag'har Orc over pretty much anything else, unfortunately. It's just not going to provide you really any value. Mechagnome, this is decent. You get that low HP shield, which can be great for surviving, especially if you're playing a caster, so something like a Warlock or a Mage, and you want an extra emergency measure of survival, and you really like the aesthetic of Mechagnome. I could see that working for a more defensive-oriented play, something like an Arcane Mage or a Destro Warlock. In those situations where you do get caught, it can be nice to have that as an emergency save. So I'm actually putting Mechagnome here up onto the A tier, around where Cultiran is. Definitely not a terrible option. Nightborne, I'm sorry, this is just not a really good one either. 3-minute cooldown piercing howl is just not going to do it for me. It's definitely better than Mag'har Orc with the spell damage increase I believe that you get on this one. But that's pretty much only for caster DPS. It's pretty lackluster unfortunately. Night Elf, this should have had a tier of its own. It's pretty much God tier now for all classes and all roles that can be Night Elf. Shadow Meld is super effective for immuning a crowd control at a key moment or a high damage spell. In the right hands is basically an immune frame. It's just an insane mechanic in PvP that you really can't go wrong with, and it gets decent throughput damage stats as well on top of that. Definitely would recommend Night Elf in this current patch. Orc, definitely getting more value now since the human racial, for healers at least, doesn't share. Pretty much if you're a resto shaman, this is like one of your best options. Maybe that or Dark Iron Dwarf, depending on... Well, actually, you don't need to deal with Solar Beam because you've got Spirit Walk on your talent. So yeah, Orc is pretty much BIS for shaman healer in this regard. I think, throwing up onto S tier is probably going to be fair. The Blood Fury for throughput. It's great for pet classes to increase their damage. Those are really popular right now with Demonology and Unholy doing pretty well in 10.2. So I think, taking that all into consideration, I think Orc is definitely a strong pick right now in 10.2. Panda, definitely an A tier. Gets really good throughput with the food that you got to make sure that you're eating. Maybe you don't need to make sure you're eating it every time. Pandas, you got to let me know. I haven't played a panda in a long time. But the extra ranged crowd control can be super effective on classes that don't have a polymorph diminishing return, something like a Shadow Priest. So you're getting throughput and extra crowd control. And that extra instant cast crowd control is super effective in those instances. It's definitely got its niche. But if you're a caster or a class that has polymorph diminishing return, you probably want to avoid picking Panda. So this is Gouge for rogues, polymorph for mage, incapacitate for monk. You don't really want to overlap it, but if you're a class that doesn't have that diminishing return, it can be really strong for chaining crowd control. So definitely an A tier pick. Tauren, the War Stomp clone, the classic. I think the crit damage modifier is actually maybe a bit sleeper on this race, especially for classes that can actually crit really big. But War Stomp, it's not as good as Cultiran racial in my mind because the stun isn't as long, although it is AoE. It ends up often just DRing things. Now, I've got a Tauren Rogue for memes and pretty much never press War Stomp. I think for me, it's probably coming in a little bit more mid-tier. I think it's really the crit modifier that actually could give it some potential. If you're a class that, has guaranteed crits, like a Destro Warlock, it might be fun for a little cheese mechanic, but again, more main stat value from Dark Iron, more value from Shadow Meld on Night Elf or Cultiran, I would think, in those instances. So it's probably going to come more mid. Troll, oddly enough, Troll is not as Troll. You'd expect Troll to be the Troll pick, but it's not. Getting the extra Bloodlust can be really effective if you just want to min-max parse as much damage as possible, which can be decent in some instances. The problem is that it's 3-minute cooldown, and you'll notice, at least in Solo Shuffle, that the most powerful classes have 2-minute cooldowns. You're very unlikely to survive to see 2 of your racial activation, which is unfortunate. So I think it falls off because of that. I'd say it's probably like the best of the B though, maybe close to a low A, something like that in the middle for its throughput, but you gotta be really careful with when you're timing it. The other sleeper effect of it is this snare reduction, which can actually be good for classes that have stacking snare reductions, because I do believe they stack. So you can lower the duration of a Chains of Ice by a significant amount and get a lot more uptime as something like a warrior, which might be odd. So something to consider. It's not totally useless in that regard. It's just unfortunate it's a 3-minute cooldown. Those are just not really good, at least in Solo Shuffle. Void Elf, honestly, I'm tossing this up into A tier. I think mostly for damage dealing casters. This is going to be one of your best picks if you can pick it. The extra proc damage increase, the extra mobility, being able to slip away from one direction and then port the opposite one. It's just really fun. This is probably like my favorite racial in the game, honestly, but I would really only recommend it for ranged DPS. Melee, you can be cheeky with it. You want to be a Void Elf warrior or something, but there's probably better options for something like a Gnome for mobility than the Void Elf, unfortunately. But maybe you could sneak up on somebody for a swap, like a Resto Druid in the back and toss it out and teleport on top of them. It's really fun, and I actually think it's value is underrated. Vulpera, this is really situational. It's actually pretty good right now into Unholy Death Knights because they're summoning a lot of extra pets all the time, and the first hit of those pets is going to be reduced. Super effective in a Demonology, and Demonology is popular right now. And honestly, the last ditch effort kind of throw your heal thing that you got, it isn't too bad as an emergency heal, which is kind of tragic that I'm putting Vulpera so far ahead of a lot of other choices. But in those niche situations, and given the popularity of those specs, I think honestly that it's not a terrible pickup. Worgen, unfortunately, I do not think is in the greatest spot. It's probably a little bit better than Lightforged. Here at the bottom, you get that extra sprint. Again, pretty long cooldown. You're really picking this for aesthetic reasons if you're going for this as opposed to competitive play. It's just going to be really tough to make Worgen work. Zandalari Troll, again, pretty much only paladins I can see wanting to go for this. It's got limited choice. You really can't use its racial except for during Divine Shield, which is the regenerating yourself type of thing. And its throughput is pretty lackluster with its procs. It's probably, you know, better than Worgen, better than Blood Elf, but definitely on the lower end overall. But this is my thoughts on the current racials for 10.2. Which ones are going to be the best performing? Which ones are underrated? What situations are they going to be good in? And I just wanted to, you know, give this an update video for you so that you could maybe consider your options and your choices. Maybe you're getting bored of one and maybe, oh, actually that one that I wanted to go isn't that bad and I can check it out. Because in reality, you can make all of these work on the ladder. I've seen rank 1 Mag'har orcs, but it's going to be a bit more of a struggle and you lose out on some pretty significant benefits to do it. But I just wanted to talk about it. So thank you very much for tuning into the video. I hope you enjoyed it and I will see you in the next one.